I died on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic, just a wet road, one careless truck driver, and a guy who forgot to look both ways. The last thing I remember is thinking, seriously? 29 years of alarm clocks and spreadsheets, and that's really how it ends for me? And then nothing. Pure darkness, total silence. And then, cold. The kind that doesn't just touch your skin, it goes straight through you. I opened my eyes and saw pine trees, snow, and a sky so massive it felt like it was physically pressing down on me. And then I looked down. 4 paws. Where my hands used to be. I'm sorry, 4 actual paws. I need a moment here. I didn't scream. Turns out wolves can't scream. What came out was a high-pitched whimper that echoed through the entire frozen forest. Great. I, Kim Jae-won, former spreadsheet analyst, dead at 29, had just been reincarnated as a wolf pup. Not a tiger, not a dragon, not even a cool bear. A wolf. A tiny, shivering, barely alive wolf pup lying alone in the snow. I tried to stand up. My legs collapsed. All 4 at the same time. I face-planted straight into the snow. Real elegant start to my second life. Here's what nobody tells you about reincarnation. Your brain stays completely human, but your brand new body doesn't listen to a single thing you tell it. I had 0 muscle memory and 0 instincts. A real wolf pup would know exactly what to do. I just panicked and fell over repeatedly in the snow. It took me a full 10 agonizing minutes to figure out how to walk in a straight line without crashing face first into a tree trunk. But here's the thing I noticed. I could smell everything at once. Pine needles, ice, frozen bark, and something dead about a kilometer to my left. And underneath all of it, something warm and alive, breathing heavily, moving straight toward me through the trees, getting closer every second. She appeared between the pines like something from a nightmare. Massive, gray, absolutely terrifying. My mother, apparently, a full-grown she-wolf, 3 times my size, with golden eyes that didn't so much look at me as look straight through me. She sniffed me once, long and deliberate. Then she picked me up by the scruff like I was a dirty sock she found on the floor. And just like that, whether I wanted it or not, my second life began. No orientation, no manual, no warning whatsoever from the universe. I got dropped into a den that smelled like wet fur, cold earth, and something I couldn't name yet but would later understand was called safety. 3 other pups were already inside, sleeping in one tangled pile of paws and ears and tails going in every direction. One of them cracked open a single eye, looked at me with absolute 0 interest, then immediately went back to sleep. Warm welcome. I curled up beside them and just lay there, trying to process what had actually happened to me and what I was supposed to do about it. My brain wouldn't stop running calculations, though. Okay. Wolf body, deep forest, dead of winter, no food, no plan. What do I actually know? I'd watched maybe 800 hours of nature documentaries in my previous life. Wolves, bears, elk, survival tactics, all of it filed away somewhere. Wolves live in packs. Hierarchy is everything. The weak get pushed out and don't survive the winter. Food goes to the strong first, always. I looked at my tiny paws, then I looked at my 3 littermates, all visibly bigger than me already. I was the runt. Of course I was the runt. The next morning, Mother returned and dropped a piece of raw meat on the den floor, then stepped back to watch what would happen next. The other 3 pups exploded toward it instantly, snarling, shoving, biting each other with 0 strategy and maximum noise. I sat back and watched the whole disaster unfold. I thought, this is not how I die again. Not in a puppy food fight in a snow den. I waited for the chaos to settle, then I walked up calmly to the leftover scraps and ate them slowly and deliberately without a single sound. Mother was watching me with her head tilted slightly. A wolf pup that doesn't panic over food? Apparently she had never seen that before. Good. Let her be curious. I needed every single advantage I could find, and starting with an element of surprise seemed perfectly reasonable. Weeks passed, and I learned fast. Genuinely faster than any of the others. How to follow a scent trail, how to move without any sound at all. My littermates played rough and clumsy, crashing into everything constantly. I played smart and spent most of my time watching instead. One brother, massive, loud, and entirely uninteresting as a personality, I silently named him Big One. He started shoving me at every meal. He had 30 extra pounds on me and absolutely 0 self-awareness about what that kind of repeated behavior tends to eventually invite. The first time he shoved me away, I let it go completely. I noted it, filed it carefully in the back of my human brain, and I waited. The second time he tried it, I bit his ear, hard, precise, right where the nerve endings cluster and the pain lands the absolute hardest. He yelped and launched himself backward like I'd hit him with electricity. My other 2 siblings froze completely and stared at me. Mother's ears went straight up. She watched without moving a single muscle. The lesson was clear. Prove yourself or get left permanently behind. Big One stared at me with wide, confused eyes. I stared straight back and kept eating without missing one single bite. He never tried again. That was the first real rule I learned in this forest. Show weakness even once, and it follows you around like a shadow you can never escape. By month 3, I could outrun 2 of my 3 littermates comfortably, and my sense of smell had become something extraordinary even by wolf standards. I could track a deer from 2 full kilometers away. I could hear a mouse moving under 3 inches of hard-packed snow. Everything was sharper. My human brain was doing something the wolves around me simply couldn't. It was analyzing everything it saw instead of just reacting to immediate stimulus. While my siblings burned energy, chasing every single rabbit that crossed their path and consistently came back empty, I sat still and watched. The deer always came to the frozen creek at dawn. Rabbits circled north when they got frightened. Prey had patterns, consistent, repeating, predictable patterns. And if prey had patterns, prey could be predicted. And if it could be predicted, it could be caught efficiently without burning everything you have. Mother started taking me out on hunts earlier than the rest of the pups. She couldn't fully explain why, but something in her instincts knew. Then one morning, everything changed entirely. I heard heavy footsteps approaching the den from the north. Slow, deliberate, completely certain of themselves. Father walked out of the trees and the entire forest went quiet. Birds stopped mid-song. Wind dropped. My littermates stopped breathing for a moment. He was the largest wolf I had seen in 2 complete lifetimes. Black fur, a long scar from ear to jaw, eyes exactly the color of cold iron. This was the alpha, the pack leader. Every living creature in this territory existed within the boundaries of what he personally allowed. He walked to each pup and sniffed them methodically. Every one of my siblings rolled over immediately. Instant, total, unconditional submission. Then he reached me. He sniffed once, then again more slowly. Then he lifted his massive head and stared at me with those iron-colored eyes. I didn't roll over. I held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to show I had a spine, short enough not to be read as a challenge. He stared for a long, heavy moment without blinking. Then he simply turned and walked away without making a single sound. Greatest exit I've witnessed. Mother let out a long, slow breath. My littermates were still visibly shaking. I had no idea if I just passed some kind of test or failed one entirely. In this forest, I was beginning to understand passing and failing often look completely identical until much, much later when consequences arrive. Spring came in hard and fast. The snow melted, the forest erupted with noise on every frequency, and prey returned in staggering numbers. Watching a real wolf pack operate as one coordinated hunting unit for the first time is genuinely one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen. But I was still the runt, still small. In a pack hunt, runts get the worst assignments. Far flank, blocking escape routes that almost never get used. I was given exactly that. Stand at the northern escape route of a small elk herd and look threatening while the experienced wolves actually worked. I watched the individual elk instead of just standing there performing menace. I watched how each one moved and where each one's eyes kept returning. One young elk kept glancing north every few seconds without stopping, like he'd already decided his escape route before the hunt even started. So I didn't stay at my assigned position. I circled further north, slow and absolutely silent, against every single instruction I'd been given by anyone. When the pack launched the attack and the herd scattered in every direction, that young elk ran north at full speed, directly into me. I brought him down completely alone. First real kill. Clean and efficient, entirely by myself, with no adult wolf anywhere near me at all. The whole pack went completely still. Alpha walked over slowly and looked at the dead elk, then turned those iron eyes directly on me. Then he made a sound I had never once heard from him. Low, like a rumble from somewhere deep in his chest. Pure, unmistakable approval. Mother's eyes were doing something I couldn't fully read, proud and terrified at the exact same time. I understood that combination completely. Big One was staring at me with an expression I recognized instantly from 10 years of office work. Pure, undiluted envy with nowhere to go. Right then I understood clearly. The forest was exactly like every corporate environment I'd survived. Hierarchy, politics, jealousy, and constant surveillance. Except here, when someone wanted your position badly enough, they didn't send a passive-aggressive email at midnight. They used their actual teeth on you. I needed to grow stronger immediately. I had just made myself completely visible to every creature in this forest, and visible meant becoming a target. That night, I lay alone at the edge of the den and stared up at a sky absolutely packed from edge to edge with stars I had never seen before. In my previous life, I never once looked at stars. Always too busy, too exhausted, too permanently anchored under fluorescent lights until midnight. Now I had all the time in the world available to me and absolutely none of the safety I used to take completely for granted every single day. I made myself a promise right there, under those stars, in a body that still felt borrowed. in a forest that hadn't yet decided if I deserved to survive. I was going to become the strongest wolf in this entire forest. Not because I was born to it, because I had lived once and knew exactly how fast it ends. I was not going to waste this second chance. Not for anything. Not for anyone. Not under any circumstances I could possibly imagine coming my way. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have imagined lying there in the cold dark, was that the real threat wasn't hiding inside the pack. It was already moving through the trees on two legs, carrying weapons, and it was far closer to me than I had any idea. Drop a comment below. Would you actually want to be reborn as a wolf in a frozen forest? Or is that a hard no from you? I smelled them before I heard them. 3 days after my first kill, the wind shifted and something new entered the forest entirely. It wasn't prey. It wasn't a predator I recognized. It was something chemical, synthetic, completely foreign to every scent in these woods. Humans. My old species. Apparently they had found this forest too, and from the weight of what they were carrying, they hadn't come to look at birds. There were 4 of them moving through the eastern edge of our territory. Boots, rifles, traps, and the particular energy of men who think they own every place they walk into. I watched them from a ridge above the tree line. My wolf eyes could track every detail of their movement from 300 meters without effort. They were setting traps along the deer trail near the creek. Steel jaw traps, partially buried, covered with leaves and pine needles. Professionals? In my previous life, I would have had 0 strong feelings about hunters in a forest. That was before the forest was my home and I was the one being hunted. I circled back to the pack immediately. I needed to warn them somehow. The only problem was that I was a wolf with no actual language to work with. I couldn't exactly walk up to the alpha and explain the concept of a steel jaw trap in any format he was going to understand. That was a real obstacle, so I did the only thing I could. I found the nearest trap location and I sat next to it. I refused to move, and then I howled until someone came. Mother arrived first. She approached the trap cautiously, nose working overtime, reading every molecule of scent around the buried metal and wire. She understood immediately. Her whole body changed. That specific stillness that means danger. Real danger. Not just a predator, but something worse. She let out one short, sharp bark. Within minutes, the whole pack had circled the trap site and was reading it with the same grim, focused silence. Alpha sniffed the trap for a long time. Then he looked at me with those iron eyes, and I genuinely could not read what was happening behind them. He turned and marked a tree trunk about 10 meters from the trap. One long spray. Everyone in the pack watched, understood, and moved away from the area. I watched this and felt something unexpected. Relief. These wolves were not stupid creatures. They were reading the situation and adapting to it in real time. Over the next 2 days, I found 3 more trap locations and led pack members to each one. Same ritual each time. Mark. Avoid. Move on. On the 4th day, I found something different. Not a trap. A small camera mounted low on a pine trunk pointing directly at the main deer trail. These hunters were not just trapping. They were studying movement patterns first, which meant they were planning something considerably larger than a few steel jaws. I thought about what I knew from my previous life. Wildlife poachers who operated at this level usually had buyers lined up before they even set a single trap. Wolves, in particular, had a market. Pelts, specifically. And a full wolf pelt from a healthy adult in winter coat was worth serious money to the right person. This was not a hobby. This was business. And our pack, living in predictable patterns on a well-mapped territory, was an ideal target for exactly this kind of operation. I needed to change our patterns, break the routines, make us harder to track, harder to predict, harder to find at any given moment. The problem was that I was still technically a pup. Nobody in this pack was going to restructure their entire daily routine based on suggestions from the smallest member. So I started small. I began moving the pack's most predictable morning path by adding detours that looked random but weren't. I would break away from the group, find a reason to loop east instead of west, and make enough noise that the others would follow out of curiosity or irritation. It worked about half the time. The other half, Big One would stare at me like I was personally ruining his morning for no reason, then go the original way anyway. But even partial disruption of our patterns was better than nothing. Every day we didn't follow the exact same route was a day the hunters' data became slightly less accurate. 3 weeks passed. The hunters came back twice more. I tracked them both times from distance, learning their faces, their habits, their preferred times of day. The one who seemed to be in charge was a large man with a red jacket who moved through the forest like he'd been doing it his entire life. Experienced, careful. He checked every camera himself. He rebaited traps that had been triggered or avoided. And he spent a long time studying tracks near the creek where our pack drank. On his 3rd visit, he knelt at a set of tracks in the mud and stayed there for a very long time. Then he looked up and scanned the tree line slowly. I was lying completely flat in the brush on the ridge above him, absolutely motionless, downwind, invisible. We stared at the same forest from opposite sides. He couldn't see me, but something in his posture said he knew he was being watched. Experienced hunters develop that sense over years. He had it. He stood up, put 2 fingers in his mouth, and whistled once. His 3 partners materialized from the trees around him within 30 seconds. He pointed at the tracks. He pointed at the ridge where I was lying. He said something I couldn't hear from that distance. They all looked up at the same time. I didn't move, not a single muscle. I had learned from watching Mother that stillness was sometimes more protective than speed. They were looking, but not seeing. After a minute, they broke apart and continued their work. But the red jacket man looked back at the ridge one more time before he disappeared into the trees. I lay there for another hour after they left, replaying every detail of what I'd just seen and drawing every conclusion I could from it. They were getting closer to finding us. And when they did, steel jaw traps weren't going to be the worst thing they had available to them. That night I did something I'd been thinking about for weeks. I left the pack's sleeping area and went to find a specific location I'd been scouting, about 4 kilometers northeast. Hidden in a natural rock formation I'd discovered while hunting alone was a secondary den site I'd been quietly preparing. Wider entrance than our current den, better drainage, 3 separate exit routes through the rocks, naturally camouflaged from above by a ledge overhang. In my previous life, I'd read enough about wildlife conservation to know one thing clearly. You protect a population by giving it options, multiple locations, multiple routes. A pack that only ever goes to one den, one water source, one hunting ground, is a pack that someone with a map and patience can plan around completely. I needed to convince the alpha to rotate between locations, which meant I needed to make our current den feel less safe without actually putting anyone in danger. I thought about this problem for a long time lying in the dark outside the rock formation. My human brain and my wolf instincts were pulling in different directions. The wolf instincts said, "This is the alpha's decision, and you are a pup, and you should stay in your designated place and eat what you're given and be grateful." The human brain said, "I watched a nature documentary once where an entire wolf pack was wiped out in 72 hours because they had one den site and no backup plan." The human brain won that argument. It usually did. I just needed to find a way to make the alpha's instincts reach the same conclusion mine already had. The opportunity came 3 days later, completely by accident. Mother led us to the creek for the morning drink and found a fresh human boot print in the mud right at the bank. Not near the bank, not approaching the bank. Right at the exact spot where the pack drank every single morning, pressed deep into the soft mud at the water's edge. The red jacket man had been here, recently. He had stood exactly where we stood every day, at exactly the time we usually stood there, and he had left that print deliberately. He was sending a message. He knew our patterns. He was showing us that he knew. In the language of hunters, this was a specific and calculated kind of intimidation. The alpha read that boot print for a very long time. His tail was completely still. His ears were flat. Something was working through his decision-making in real time. Then he turned and walked northeast. Not our usual morning direction. Northeast. Directly toward the rock formation I had spent 2 weeks quietly preparing. I genuinely could not tell if he had made that choice through his own territorial instinct, or if my detour patterns over the past weeks had subconsciously mapped a new route for him. It didn't matter. He was going there. I fell into position in the pack line and kept my face completely neutral, which is harder to do as a wolf than you might expect. When the alpha reached the rock formation and stepped inside, the pack spread out behind him and began reading the space, sniffing every surface and exit. Mother went directly to the 3 exit routes I had cleared and tested each one. She looked back at the alpha with an expression that, in human terms, would translate as solid. The alpha walked the full interior twice. Then he sat in the center, looked at the entrance for a long moment, and made that low, rumbling sound again. The pack understood. This was now also ours. A second location, a backup. An option that hadn't existed 48 hours ago and now potentially made the difference. That night, sleeping in the rock formation with the sound of the pack breathing around me, I felt something I hadn't felt since I woke up in the snow. Useful. Not just surviving, not just keeping pace with the others. Actually useful. Actually doing something that mattered with the brain I had brought into this body. The hunters came back 4 days later. I tracked them to our original den from a safe distance and watched them approach it with a confidence that said they expected to find us there. They found an empty den. Cold. No fresh tracks leading in. No recent smell of pack activity. The red jacket man stood in the entrance for a long time with a flashlight. His expression, even from that distance, was interesting. Not frustrated exactly, more like recalibrating. Like a chess player who had just watched their opponent make a move they hadn't anticipated. He stepped back out, looked at the tree line for a long moment, and I had the very specific feeling that he was thinking about me. Not wolves in general, me specifically. I was probably imagining that. I was a wolf pup. He was an experienced hunter who had no reason to consider that the animal he was tracking might be doing exactly what he was doing. But I filed it away anyway. In this forest, underestimating anything had a cost. I had learned that much clearly enough in the months since I first fell face first into the snow. Winter was deepening. The days were getting shorter, and the cold was becoming something that pressed against you constantly and never fully went away between hunts. Prey was becoming scarcer. The elk herds had moved to lower ground. The deer were harder to find. Even the smaller animals were going quiet and disappearing into their own survival strategies. Feeding 6 adult wolves and 4 growing pups through a hard winter required a hunt every single day without exception. There was no margin for error in the food calculation. I started taking longer solo runs to map hunting grounds further out, looking for prey concentrations that the pack hadn't visited yet and the hunters hadn't found. On one of these runs, about 12 kilometers from the rock formation, I found something completely unexpected lying in the snow between 2 fallen trees. Another wolf. Young, male, gray with a white chest patch, and clearly in serious trouble. Back left leg caught in a trap. Steel jaw trap. The hunter's work. He had been there for at least a day based on the snow around him. He was exhausted from struggling and had gone still in the particular way that means the body is conserving everything it has left. He heard me approach, and his head came up, eyes still sharp despite everything, which was a good sign. He let out one low warning sound from the back of his throat. I stopped. I sat down about 3 meters away in the snow and just looked at him. And let him read me. Let him understand I wasn't there to finish what the trap had started. We stayed like that for several minutes. His breathing was shallow but steady. The trap had caught him above the ankle joint. Bad, but not the worst possible location. I had watched Mother work injuries before. I had watched her clean wounds with her tongue, work teeth around foreign objects and flesh, apply pressure with her paw to slow bleeding. But this trap required something different. The spring mechanism needed to be compressed from both sides simultaneously. That needed 2 sets of paws working together. I moved closer slowly. He growled once, lower and more serious. I stopped again, waited, then moved closer again. This continued for about 10 more minutes. Eventually he stopped growling. He put his head back down on the snow. Not surrender exactly. More like a decision to trust one thing in a situation that had already cost him everything else. I worked on the trap for 40 minutes. My paws weren't built for fine mechanical work. I bent one claw completely backward at one point and felt nothing about it. When the spring finally gave and the jaws separated, the young wolf pulled his leg free and immediately tried to stand. His leg buckled. He went down hard into the snow. I sat next to him. He looked at me with those sharp eyes for a long moment. Then he put his muzzle briefly against the side of my neck. 1 second. Then he pulled back. In wolf language I was starting to understand. That meant something close to, "I see you. I owe you. I will remember this." I looked at his leg. He was going to need time before he could run properly. He couldn't survive alone in this forest through winter in his current condition. I thought about the pack, about the alpha, about how outside wolves were received on claimed territory in every nature documentary I had ever watched. Then I thought about the hunters, about 4 men with rifles and traps and cameras and a very specific plan for every wolf in this forest. I made a decision. I pointed my nose toward the rock formation and started walking. I looked back once. The young wolf watched me for a moment, then slowly got up and followed. His name, I decided, would be Gray. Because I was apparently in the habit of naming wolves now, and I had never claimed to be particularly creative about it. Getting Gray accepted by the pack was going to be one of the more complicated problems I had faced since arriving in this forest. But complicated problems were exactly what I had spent my previous life learning to navigate. 1 meeting at a time, 1 decision at a time, 1 winter at a time. The forest was getting harder, the hunters were getting smarter. And somewhere out there in the dark between the trees, whatever was coming next was already on its way. Introducing a stranger wolf to an established pack is not something you do casually. There's a specific protocol and 0 room for improvisation. Gray understood this better than I did. He had grown up as an actual wolf with actual wolf instincts, unlike me who had grown up with spreadsheets and deadlines. He slowed his pace about 200 meters from the rock formation. His nose was working overtime, reading everything the wind carried from inside. He could smell the alpha from here. I could see it in how his whole posture changed. Lower, more careful, every step placed with complete deliberation. I went ahead of him and entered the formation first. The pack was awake. Mother read my scent immediately and then read the second scent behind me and went completely still. Alpha was on his feet before I cleared the entrance. He was past me in 2 strides, standing at the threshold, staring out at Gray in the snow. Gray had stopped. He was doing exactly the right thing. Head low, body angled slightly sideways, weight shifted back. Classic non-challenge posture. Textbook submission signals. But he was also bleeding through the wound on his leg and leaving a red trail in the snow, which was not helping anyone read the situation as low threat. The Alpha stared at Gray for a very long time. Gray held his position without moving a single muscle. The cold pressed down on everyone equally. Then Big One pushed past the Alpha from behind, chest out, ears forward, doing his absolute best impression of someone who had earned the right to make decisions. He had not. He let out a sharp bark in Gray's direction, the wolf equivalent of "get out of here right now," and took 2 aggressive steps forward into the snow. Gray's eyes flicked to Big One for exactly 1 second, then went back to the Alpha. He was smart enough to understand which one of them actually mattered here. The Alpha watched Big One's performance with the expression of a senior executive watching an intern make a scene at a client meeting, distinctly unimpressed. He stepped forward past Big One, walked directly to Gray, and sniffed him in a long, slow circle. Gray didn't breathe the entire time. I barely breathed either. The Alpha completed his circle, looked at the injured leg, looked at my paws where the bent claw had left a small blood mark, and then looked at me directly. That look lasted about 4 seconds. I had no idea what he was reading in my face, but whatever it was, he seemed to reach a conclusion about it. He turned and walked back inside. He didn't make the rumbling approval sound, but he also didn't attack, didn't drive Gray off, didn't signal the pack to close ranks. In wolf social language, that kind of silence is sometimes the most important thing that gets said. Gray could stay, for now, on the lowest rung of everything. Big One stood in the snow looking furious about a decision he hadn't been consulted on. I walked past him back inside and did not make eye contact. Some things you just let go. Gray spent the next 2 weeks recovering near the formation entrance. He ate last, slept at the outer edge, and moved with the careful awareness of someone who understood his position exactly. I brought him extra food when I could do it without creating a scene, small pieces, nothing that would read as a challenge to the existing feeding order. He watched everything the pack did with the same focused attention I used myself, learning the patterns, learning the personalities, figuring out where he fit. By week 2, he could run at 70%. The pack had stopped treating him like a stranger and started treating him like the new, lowest-ranked member instead. That was real progress. During those 2 weeks, the hunters came back twice more. The Red Jacket Man had changed his approach after finding our original den empty the second time. He was now working in a wider search pattern, covering more ground, spending less time at any single location. He had stopped being predictable, which meant he was learning too. I tracked his movements on both visits. He was systematically checking every area of the territory where a pack might reasonably establish a secondary site. He had a notebook. He wrote in it constantly. I watched him fill 3 pages during one visit, alone, sketching terrain features, marking tree types, noting wind directions. This man was building a picture of our territory from the outside, the same way I had been building a picture of the hunters from the inside. We were studying each other. The difference was that he had a rifle, and I was technically still a pup, who occasionally fell off ridgelines while trying to watch him through dense brush. On his second visit, he came within 60 meters of the rock formation. He stopped at a natural clearing, looked at the rock outcropping from the outside, and wrote something down. I was inside the formation with the pack when this happened. I could smell him through the rock. Mother could too. She went absolutely still and put one paw across the nearest pup. The Alpha moved to the secondary exit and positioned himself there without making a sound. Everyone in the pack was suddenly exactly where they needed to be without a single signal being given. This was the thing about wolves that my nature documentary education had told me, but that I hadn't fully understood until I lived inside it. They coordinated without language. Every member read the same environmental information and reached the same operational conclusion simultaneously. No meeting required, no chain of command to work through. In my previous life, I had sat in 1,000 meetings that tried to achieve exactly this kind of immediate collective intelligence and never once fully got there. The Red Jacket Man stayed in the clearing for about 6 minutes. He looked at the rock formation twice. He wrote in his notebook, then he moved on north. After he was gone, the pack held its position for another 20 minutes before anyone moved. Then, Mother let out one soft exhale and everything relaxed at once. Gray had been pressed flat against the inner wall the whole time, completely motionless, not even blinking. When it was over, he looked at me from across the space. In his eyes was an expression I recognized immediately, the same one I'd had in my first weeks in this forest, the clear, cold understanding that this was not a safe place to be complacent. Good. Complacency was exactly what got animals caught. And right now, complacency was the one thing none of us could afford going into the deepest part of winter. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees over the following week. Hunting became genuinely difficult in a way it hadn't been before. The ground was frozen solid. Prey was scarce and moving constantly, not settling into the predictable patterns that made hunting efficient. Every meal required maximum effort. I started hunting with Gray as a pair on the days when the pack split into smaller groups. His leg was at 80% now and climbing steadily. Hunting in a pair is a specific skill set. You learn the other animals' instincts, predict their next move before they make it, position yourself to complete what they start. With any other wolf, this process takes months of shared experience to develop properly. With Gray, it took about 4 days, and I couldn't entirely explain why. He had an instinct for reading terrain that complemented the way I read prey behavior. He went wide while I went direct. He pushed while I positioned. On our 5th hunt together, we took down a fully grown deer in under 2 minutes. Clean, coordinated, no wasted movement anywhere. Efficiency that impressed even Mother when we brought it back. Big One watched us return with that deer and said nothing. His silence had a specific texture to it that I had learned to read carefully over the preceding months. It wasn't just envy anymore. It was something more calculating, more patient. He was watching and waiting for something specific, and I needed to figure out what that was before he found it. The Red Jacket Man's 3rd visit happened on a morning when the whole pack had gone out on a large, coordinated hunt, and I had stayed behind with 2 of the pups. I heard the hunters before I smelled them, which meant the wind had shifted, and they had approached from the one direction that gave them a temporary scent advantage. There were 5 of them this time, not 4. They had added a person since the last visit, and the new one moved differently from the others. Lighter, faster, more careful. The Red Jacket Man led them directly to the clearing outside the rock formation. He didn't hesitate. He didn't check his notebook. He walked straight to it like he'd decided. I got the 2 pups pressed against the back wall and positioned myself at the secondary exit. My heart was doing something extremely loud inside my chest. The Red Jacket Man stood at the formation entrance and shone a light inside. The beam swept across the interior. I was in the shadow behind a rock ledge with the pups tucked beneath me. He held the light steady for a long moment. Then he said something to the person beside him in a low voice. The other person responded. They both looked at the entrance. They knew something had been living here. The smell alone was enough to confirm that. But the pack was out, the space was cold, and there was no movement to react to. The Red Jacket Man crouched and looked at the ground inside the entrance. He was reading tracks. There were dozens of them pressed into the frozen mud, every size and weight. He straightened up, looked at his notebook, wrote something short, then looked back into the formation one more time with that specific expression of someone who has confirmed a theory. Then he did something that genuinely surprised me. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small device about the size of a thick paperback and set it in a crevice in the rock wall outside. A camera, smaller and better camouflaged than the ones he'd been using on the deer trail, pointed directly at the formation entrance at ground level. He covered it with a piece of bark that matched the surrounding rock almost perfectly. Then he stood back and looked at his work and apparently decided it was good enough. The 5 hunters moved away north without looking back. I waited until their scent was completely gone before I moved a single muscle. Then I went to the camera and looked at it for a long time. It was motion activated with a cellular transmitter. I could see the small antenna on the side. Every time anything walked past that entrance, a photo or video would be sent immediately to a phone somewhere. Probably the Red Jacket Man's phone. Probably within seconds. This changed everything. We couldn't use the rock formation anymore. Not until that camera was dealt with. And dealing with it without triggering it was a very specific kind of problem. The camera had a motion sensor that covered roughly a 2-meter arc in front of the lens. Anything moving through that arc at ground level would activate it immediately. I studied every approach angle for a full hour. One possibility existed. A narrow path from the upper left moving directly along the rock face that might stay outside the sensor arc completely. Might. That single word was doing an enormous amount of work in this situation, and I was completely, uncomfortably aware of exactly how much. I went back to the secondary exit, came around the outside of the formation along the upper rock ledge, moved horizontally across the rock face 6 feet above the ground. My claws found purchase in the frozen granite, one grip at a time. It was slow and uncomfortable, and one slip meant falling directly into the camera's field of view. I reached the crevice where the camera was sitting, pressed flat against the cold stone, and worked the device loose from its position with one careful paw. The camera came free. I pressed it against the rock. The green power light went red immediately. Loss of signal would alert someone very soon, and I had almost no time left to move. I carried it along the rock face back the way I'd come. Dropped down at the secondary exit and ran northeast for about 3 kilometers to a place I had scouted weeks earlier. A fast-moving section of the creek where the water ran over rocks and never fully froze. I dropped the camera into it from the bank. It disappeared under the surface immediately. Water damage to the transmitter. No signal. Explainable as a device that fell or was displaced by a large animal. Nothing that would tell the Red Jacket Man his camera had been deliberately removed. I sat by the creek and breathed for a few minutes. My claws ached from the rock face. My legs were shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the whole situation. Then I heard the pack returning from the hunt in the distance, and I started moving back to meet them before anyone noticed I had been doing something unusual. Gray fell into pace beside me as I rejoined the group. He looked at my paws. He looked at the direction I'd come from. He said nothing, asked nothing. He just ran beside me back to the formation. and when the pack settled in for the evening, he positioned himself slightly closer to me than his usual spot at the outer edge. That was Gray's version of, "I see what you're doing here. I don't fully understand all of it, but I'm with you regardless of where it leads." I lay in the dark, listening to the pack breathe, and thought about the red jacket man finding a dead camera signal and knowing that something in that forest had responded to him specifically. Not an animal that had accidentally knocked something over, not weather damage or loose mounting, something that had understood what the camera was for and had dealt with it deliberately. If he was half as smart as everything I'd seen suggested, he was going to reach a conclusion that should have been impossible. And then he was going to come back with a very different kind of plan. The pack was safe tonight, probably safe tomorrow. But the red jacket man was not the kind of person who stopped because something got harder. He was the kind of person who got more interested when something got harder. I knew that type. I'd worked for that type in my previous life. Winter was at its absolute worst now, and somewhere, out in the dark beyond our territory, a man with a notebook and a very specific theory was sitting at a table thinking. I had bought us time. What I hadn't done yet was solve the actual problem. And time in a forest in December with hunters and dwindling prey was the one resource I could not afford to waste. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow there was hunting to do, Gray's leg to keep monitoring, the pack's routes to keep varying, and whatever came next to figure out before it arrived. The forest was never quiet. Even at night when everything slept, something was always moving somewhere, just beyond the range where you could name it with any certainty. I had learned to find that sound reassuring rather than frightening. It meant the world was still running. It meant there was still time. I was going to need every single second of it, and probably several more seconds I didn't currently have available to me yet. The red jacket man came back on a morning when the sky was the color of old iron, and the cold had a specific edge to it that said, "Something is about to change." He didn't come alone this time. He came with 8 people. 8. And 2 of them were carrying equipment I had never seen used against wolves before. Tranquilizer rifles, long barrels, different weight, different carrying posture from a standard hunting rifle. I knew what they were immediately from my previous life. This was no longer a poaching operation, or if it still was, it had gotten considerably more sophisticated and considerably better funded since the last time I watched them work. Professional wildlife capture gear meant one of 2 things. Either someone with serious money had gotten involved, or I'd been reading this whole situation wrong from the very beginning. I tracked them from the ridge above the eastern boundary, downwind, watching their formation move through the trees with coordination that said years of practice, not improvisation. The red jacket man was at the front. He had his notebook out already. He was checking it against the terrain in front of him, matching what he had written to what he was actually seeing. He stopped at a natural clearing about 2 kilometers from the rock formation and held up one fist. Everyone behind him stopped instantly. No sound, no shuffling. Disciplined. He turned a slow circle, reading the wind, reading the tree line, reading the ground. Then he pointed northeast, directly at the rock formation. He knew exactly where he was going. I turned and ran, not back to the formation, away from it, looping wide to come in from the western approach without crossing any ground the hunters had already walked. The pack needed to move. Right now. No time for the alpha's deliberation process. No time for Big One to have opinions about anything. We needed to be gone before those 8 people arrived. I came into the formation at speed and did something I had never done before in the months since I woke up in this body. I went straight to the alpha and I barked directly in his face. Not a challenge, not aggression, something else. Urgency, direction, a demand wrapped in the closest thing to language I could produce with the tools available to me. The alpha's eyes went sharp immediately. He read my body, my breathing, the direction I'd come from, and the specific frequency of the sound I had made. He was on his feet in 2 seconds. One look at me. One look at the entrance. Then that deep, commanding sound that moved through every wolf in the formation like electricity through a wire. The pack was moving in under 30 seconds. Mother swept the 2 youngest pups up by their scruffs without breaking stride. Gray was already at the western exit, leg holding perfectly. Big One was last up, taking 3 extra seconds I counted individually and stored away carefully. 3 seconds that, under different circumstances, could have cost us everything we'd built. We ran west, then south, along a route I had mentally rehearsed for weeks, crossing 3 stream beds to break our scent trail, ending at a location I had scouted completely alone 2 months before. A natural hollow in a hillside, not as well structured as the rock formation, but deep enough, covered enough, and most importantly, completely absent from any map a human had any reason to make. It took 40 minutes at full pack speed to reach it. When we arrived, the Alpha walked the perimeter twice, tested both exits, and then stood at the entrance and looked at me for a long moment. Not the iron eyes, something different, something I didn't have an exact word for in either language I currently operated in. He went inside and the pack followed. I was last through the entrance. As across the threshold I heard it, faint and distant from the northeast. 8 people finding an empty den again. I sat at the hollow entrance and listened to that distant nothing. What I felt wasn't relief or satisfaction. It was something quieter and more complicated than either of those things. We had made it. A pack that trusted me at the last possible second in a body I'd had less than a year, against 8 people with equipment and planning and every numerical advantage. Gray appeared beside me at the entrance, and we sat together in the cold for a while without doing anything in particular, just existing in the same space after something difficult. Inside, I heard the pack settling, wolves finding their familiar order in an unfamiliar space. Warmth and position negotiated quietly, without anyone needing to oversee the process. Big One was in there somewhere making his feelings known about the relocation in whatever way Big One made his feelings known. I decided to let that be someone else's concern for the evening. 3 days passed. The hunters swept the territory, and I tracked them every day from a distance, mapping their search pattern, noting where they lingered and where they moved through fast. They found the rock formation, the original den, 3 trail cameras I'd previously avoided, and the creek where I'd dropped the first camera. The red jacket man spent a very long time at that bank. He stood at the bank where I had dropped it and looked at the water and wrote in his notebook for several minutes. Then he looked upstream and downstream and wrote some more. He knew, I was certain he knew. Not the full picture, not the impossible conclusion that would have required him to accept something his entire framework of understanding would reject. But he knew there was something operating in this territory that wasn't behaving like any wolf he had tracked in 20 years of doing exactly this kind of work. On the 4th day, he came back alone. No team, no equipment beyond a small pack and his notebook. Just him, moving through the forest at a pace slower than I had ever seen him use before. He wasn't searching, he was walking. He stopped at a ridge I had used several times as an observation point and sat down on a flat rock and just looked at the forest below him. He stayed there for about an hour. I stayed about 300 meters behind him on the same ridge, completely still, watching him watch the forest. At one point, he reached into his pack and took out a thermos and drank from it slowly. Then he put it away and took out his notebook and didn't write in it, just held it open on his knee. After an hour, he said something out loud to the empty forest. I was too far away to hear the words. Then he closed his notebook, stood up, and walked back the way he had come. I followed him to the territory boundary and watched him cross it. He didn't look back. He just kept walking until the trees swallowed him completely and his scent faded on the wind. I sat at the boundary line for a long time after he was gone. The territory boundary that the Alpha had marked and remarked and defended for years before I arrived. Something had just happened that I didn't have vocabulary for yet. A conversation conducted entirely without words, between 2 parties, who both understood exactly what had been communicated. He wasn't coming back. I didn't know how I knew that with such certainty, but I did. Whatever he had come to understand about this forest, it had changed his calculation completely. I turned back toward the hollow. Winter was still deep and hard. 3 hungry pups, a pack to feed, Gray's leg to monitor, and 100 immediate problems that all required immediate attention. The existential questions could wait. That was the thing about living inside an animal's life. The present was so constant and demanding that the larger questions rarely got more than a few minutes. Gray met me about a kilometer from the hollow. He had come looking for me, which he had never done before, and his expression when he found me was one I was still learning to read on a wolf's face. Concern. That was what it was. He had noticed I'd been gone longer than usual, and he had come to check. It was such a simple thing, and it stopped me completely in my tracks for a moment. I had spent so much time thinking about survival, strategy, threat management, pattern recognition, the relentless forward pressure of staying alive and keeping everyone else alive too. And here was Gray, who had every reason to focus entirely on his own recovery and his own standing in a pack that still watched him carefully, and he had come looking for me. I walked up to him and pressed my head briefly against the side of his neck. 1 second, the same way he had done it in the snow the day I freed him from the trap. He made a low sound that I had come to understand meant something between acknowledgement and amusement. Then he turned and we ran back to the hollow together. Spring arrived the way it always did in this forest. Suddenly, and without much warning, like someone had made a decision overnight, and the whole world had agreed to it. The snow pulled back from the southern slopes first, then the creek banks, then the low meadows where the deer came back in numbers that made the pack's energy shift immediately. The hollow had served us well through the worst of winter. Now it was time to move back toward the territory center, toward the places where prey was richest and the land was most familiar. The Alpha led the spring relocation himself, taking the exact route I would have chosen. Either I'd learned to think like a wolf, or good strategy is simply good strategy in any brain. Big One had spent the winter recalibrating his relationship to me. The direct pushing had stopped months ago, replaced by something harder to deal with, a quiet, extremely patient watching. He was waiting for me to make a mistake, the kind of mistake that could be used. I was aware of this the way you are aware of a sound in a building that you can't quite locate but can't stop hearing. The spring hunt was the first big coordinated pack hunt since the hunters had arrived and forced us into survival mode. Everyone was lean and sharp and ready in a way that deep winter hunger creates. Gray ran point with me on the far flank. We'd hunted together enough times that coordination happened without signals now, each of us reading the terrain and the other at the same time. The hunt was clean and fast. 2 adult deer, coordinated between both flanking pairs, both taken within seconds of each other. The largest single result the pack had produced since I arrived. When the pack gathered to feed, the alpha did something that made the entire group go still. He stepped back from the kill and looked at me. Then he looked at the food. Then he stepped back further. He was offering me second position at the kill. Behind himself, before Mother, before every adult wolf who had been here longer and earned their standing through years I hadn't been part of. I understood what this was. Not a gift. Wolves don't give gifts. It was a recognition, a public statement in the language of standing in position and pack order. I walked forward and ate second. Every wolf in that clearing registered what had just happened. Big One registered it loudest, and with the most complicated expression I had ever seen on his face. After the feed, Gray ate the scraps I'd left for him. All winter his rank had quietly climbed. Approaching middle of the pack, not bad for a wolf who arrived bleeding and completely alone. I looked at the pack in pale spring sunlight. Mother cleaning pups, Alpha on the tree line, Gray beside me, Big One in the corner, watchful and complicated, chewing something aggressively. This was mine, not the territory, not the rank, not any of the formal structures that wolves organized their lives around. Something else. This was the thing I had not known I was building while I was busy surviving. A place, a belonging, a set of lives that were tangled up with mine in ways that went beyond proximity or shared interest. In my previous life, I had lived alone in an apartment with plants I kept forgetting to water and a job I was reasonably good at, and friends I saw less and less as the years passed. I had not understood, until I woke up in the snow with 4 paws and no plan, what it felt like to be genuinely necessary to the people, the creatures around you. To notice the trap before anyone stepped in it, to find the hollow, to run back when the hunters came and bark in the alpha's face because there was no time left for anything more graceful than that. I was still the runt, still the black-furred anomaly that didn't look quite right and thought in ways that didn't quite map onto how wolves were supposed to think. But I was here, fully, completely, without reservation here, in a forest that had tried to kill me in every season and failed every single time. The red jacket man was gone. Spring was arriving. The pack was fed. Gray was beside me. The alpha watched the tree line with the confidence of something that knows exactly where it belongs. I looked at the tree line too. I didn't know what was coming next. Nobody in this forest ever did. That was the deal you made when you decided to stay. Something was always moving out there beyond the range where you could name it. Something new, something unfamiliar, something that hadn't introduced itself yet. Good. I had learned by now that unfamiliar didn't mean dangerous, and dangerous didn't mean impossible, and impossible was just the word people and wolves used before they figured out how. I was not done with this forest, not even close, and whatever came through those trees next, it was going to find something it did not expect waiting for it on this side, something that had died once on a wet Tuesday in a previous life, and decided quite firmly that it was not going to make a habit of dying ever again.